If you've gardened for more than a season or two, you already know one truth that time keeps teaching us again and again. Healthy soil isn't just important, it is everything. It is the quiet engine beneath every blossom, every tomato, every leaf of lettuce we proudly cut from our garden beds. But for many of us, especially as the years go by, the way we were taught to fix our soil no longer feels doable. The digging, the double digging, the turning, the hauling of heavy compost bags. By the end of a Saturday afternoon, our backs protest harder than the weeds we were trying to remove. And somewhere deep down we start to wonder, is there a gentler way? A way that works with nature instead of fighting it? What if the answer has been sitting in our kitchens this whole time? What if a simple grain one we cook every week could wake up our soil from the inside out? Not as a fertilizer in the traditional sense, but as a spark that starts a living chain reaction under our feet. Today, you and I are going to explore one of the most surprising, most affordable, and most scientifically supported soil-building tricks I have ever seen. A trick that gardeners across the United States, from raised bed beginners to experienced seniors caring for long-loved gardens, are quietly using to grow bigger worms, richer microbial life, and softer, healthier soil without digging at all. I'm talking about rice. Yes, plain, everyday rice. And before you think this is just another internet hack, let me reassure you. Behind this little grain is real research from U.S. soil scientists, practical demonstrations from respected gardening educators, and decades of traditional agricultural knowledge that modern farming somehow forgot. So, settle in, take a breath, and imagine gardening not with muscle, but with biology. Imagine letting the soil rebuild itself while you simply guide the process. This is the philosophy behind today's method, and once you understand it, you will never look at a bowl of rice or a patch of tired soil the same way again. Let's begin with the foundation, understanding why rice works, not as plant food, but as soil food. Part 1. Why rice can transform soil from the microbes up. Before we talk about how to use rice, we need to understand why it works so well. Because once you see the biology behind this, the method becomes not only simple, but almost inevitable. It makes sense in the deepest way, nature's way. Rice is not a fertilizer in the conventional sense. It doesn't deliver large doses of nitrogen or phosphorus the way a bag of store-bought fertilizer does. What rice does contain is something far more powerful for long-term soil health. Starch. Starch is pure carbohydrate, and in soil, carbohydrates are the language of life. The moment starch touches moist soil, soil microbes wake up. Beneficial bacteria, actinomycetes, and fungi sense the incoming energy source and begin multiplying. It's not the rice itself that feeds your plants. It's the explosion of microbial life that happens because of the rice. U.S. horticultural experts, including those interviewed by the publication Food Republic, confirm this simple chain reaction. When starch enters the soil, it becomes a buffet for beneficial microbes. And when microbial numbers rise, earthworms follow. Worms are not attracted to the rice itself. They are attracted to the microbial bloom growing on the rice particles. It is their favorite food in the world. Scientific studies from agricultural researchers have measured this effect directly. In soils treated with rice water or rice solids, the population of soil-building bacteria rises significantly within days. That surge of microbial activity improves soil structure, increases nutrient availability, and even helps break down stubborn clay particles that have resisted our shovels for years. A 2023 field study from plant science researchers found that fermented rice water increased beneficial bacteria and improved plant growth almost as effectively as commercial fertilizers. But unlike fertilizers, rice also builds the soil itself, making it richer, softer, and more alive over time. Here's why that matters. Healthy soil isn't just about nutrients, it's about structure. When microbes flourish, they release natural glues that bind tiny soil particles into crumbly, airy aggregates. These little soil crumbs are the secret behind good drainage, strong root penetration, and oxygen movement through the soil. They are the difference between hard, lifeless earth and soil that feels like chocolate cake. And of course, wherever microbes thrive and soil softens, earthworms appear. Worms are nature's quiet engineers. They till the soil 24 hours a day, not by force, but by digestion. With every movement, they create tunnels that let water flow and roots explore. With every mouthful, they produce worm castings, some of the richest, most balanced plant nutrients found anywhere in nature. So when you add rice to your soil, you're not feeding your plants directly. You're feeding an entire underground workforce. Microbes eat the rice, worms eat the microbes. Your soil becomes looser, darker, and richer, and your plants, at the end of this chain, enjoy the best growing environment they've ever had. The beauty of this system is that it lets biology do the heavy lifting. No more back-breaking digging, no more turning stubborn soil with a shovel. You simply provide the spark, the carbohydrate, and nature builds an ecosystem that continues working long after you stop. In a moment, we'll explore exactly how to use rice safely and effectively, including the one method most gardeners get wrong, and the one technique that works every time. But first, take a moment to appreciate this. Soil improvement does not have to be hard. It does not have to hurt your back. It does not require expensive tools or complicated amendments. Sometimes, all it takes is a handful of rice and a little trust in nature's own design. Part 2. The chain reaction. How rice feeds microbes, attracts worms, and rebuilds soil naturally. Now that we understand rice does not feed plants directly, but instead fuels an entire underground ecosystem, let's look more closely at how this chain reaction unfolds beneath the surface. Because the moment rice enters the soil, whether as a grain, a powder, or a milky liquid, the soil begins a quiet transformation that is both elegant and scientifically measurable. It begins with starch. Starch molecules are long chains of glucose, and glucose is the simplest, most universal food source for microbes. Soil scientists often say that carbon drives the soil, and rice delivers that carbon in one of the most digestible forms nature provides. When a rice grain softens in moist soil, beneficial bacteria such as lactobacillus, bacillus, and various actinomyces begin colonizing its surface. Under a microscope, the rice looks like a bustling city, layers upon layers of microbes multiplying, forming biofilms, and releasing enzymes that further break the rice down. And here is where the magic really begins. These microbes don't just eat, they build. As they multiply, they produce sticky substances called polysaccharides, natural glues that hold soil particles together, forming those beautiful crumbly aggregates every gardener dreams of. These aggregates improve airflow, moisture retention, and nutrient exchange. In simple terms, they turn dead, compacted dirt into living soil. And when the microbes bloom, the worms respond. Earthworms have no desire for raw rice, but they have an extraordinary ability to detect microbial activity. When the microbial bloom happens around the rice, worms seek it out instinctively. Gardeners often notice that when they bury a handful of rice, worms congregate there in a matter of days. The worms graze on the microbes, aerate the soil as they move, and deposit worm castings, tiny capsules rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, micronutrients, and growth hormones. These castings are one of the most balanced natural fertilizers on Earth, and they are delivered right where your plants need them, day after day, without you lifting a finger. Researchers studying organic soil amendments have documented this effect clearly. In fields watered with fermented rice wash, beneficial bacteria increased dramatically, earthworm density rose, and the soil showed greater nutrient availability and improved structure. These improvements didn't fade after a single crop. They persisted because once a soil ecosystem becomes active, it maintains itself as long as it has occasional food inputs. So, the rice trick is not about adding nutrients the way chemical fertilizers do. It is about sparking a living engine beneath your plants, a biological engine that works continuously, silently, and sustainably. And the best part? You can trigger all of this with something sitting quietly inside your pantry. Now, let's move from the why to the how. Because using rice correctly makes all the difference between feeding beneficial microbes and accidentally feeding pests. Part 3. How to use rice the right way. The deep pocket method and other techniques that actually work. If you've ever searched online for gardening tips, you've probably seen people toss rice onto the soil surface and claim it transforms their garden. But here's the truth, backed by both science and real-world experience. How you use rice determines whether you create a microbial paradise or a pest problem. Most gardeners get this wrong, and it's not their fault. Nobody ever told them that starch is incredibly aromatic to rodents, raccoons, and even certain insects when exposed to air. The trick is to keep that scent underground, where only microbes and worms can find it. That's where the deep pocket method comes in. The deep pocket method is simple, safe, and remarkably effective. You begin by digging a small pocket in the soil about 6 to 8 inches deep. This depth is key. It's deep enough to trap the scent, deep enough to prevent pests from detecting it, and deep enough to place the rice where soil moisture is more stable and microbial life is more concentrated. Into this pocket, you place just half a cup of plain rice. Not seasoned rice, not fried rice, just plain, uncooked or cooked rice, because salt, oil, and spices harm soil microbes and worms. If the rice is cooked, mix it gently with a bit of soil right there in the hole to avoid clumping and to speed decomposition. If it's raw, you can simply sprinkle it in. Then, and this is essential, you cover the pocket firmly. Press the soil down so that no air gaps remain. This seals the scent, locks in moisture, and allows microbes to colonize the rice undisturbed. If you garden with mulch, pull your mulch back over the area and let nature take over. Within days, the rice begins to soften. The starch hydrates. microbial activity surrounding the rice skyrockets, and before long, worms discover the feast. Gardeners who have tried this method often describe the results as astonishing. When they revisit the buried pocket a week later, they find worms gathered like a community event, soil darker and looser than before, and the rice nearly gone, deisted not by pests but by the living ecosystem itself. You can repeat these pockets every couple of feet across a garden bed or concentrate them near struggling plants. Think of each pocket as a biological starter engine, igniting soil life exactly where you need it most. But grains aren't the only form of rice that works. If you want an even gentler approach, especially for potted plants or raised beds, there is another method backed by strong science. Rice wash water. Rice wash water. The cloudy liquid left after rinsing rice is rich in soluble starch, trace minerals, and vitamins like B1 and B3. When used fresh, it provides a mild feed for soil microbes. When fermented lightly for 24 hours, its power multiplies. Lactic acid bacteria grow rapidly in it, creating a microbial inoculant that researchers have shown can rival commercial fertilizer in improving plant growth while simultaneously improving soil quality. Using rice water is as simple as watering your plants. With a very important note: you use it diluted, not full strength. Too much starch at once can overwhelm the soil and create surface mold. But a 1-to-1 or 1-to-3 dilution once a month, that brings life to soil without any risk of imbalance. Gardeners across the U.S. have reported greener leaves, better blooms, and more earthworm activity in beds treated with fermented rice rinse. Each method, grain pockets, rice water, or a combination of both, works, not because rice is magical, but because it feeds the system. It strengthens the biology beneath your soil rather than forcing growth from above. And that is the heart of regenerative gardening. In the next part of this journey, we'll explore how to choose between raw rice, cooked rice, and rice water, and how to avoid the one mistake that causes far too many people to give up on this method before they ever see the results. Part 4. Raw rice, cooked rice, or rice water. Understanding which one your soil needs. Now that we've uncovered how rice fuels the living engine beneath your soil, it's time to explore a question many gardeners ask once they try this method for the first time. Does it matter what form the rice is in? And the answer, backed by biological research and real-world experience, is yes. Raw rice, cooked rice, and rice water each trigger the same microbial chain reaction, but they do so at different speeds and intensities. Understanding these differences will help you choose the right approach for your garden, your climate, and your plants. Let's begin with raw rice, the simplest and slowest of the three. Raw rice acts like a time-release capsule of carbon. It hydrates slowly, it softens gradually, and microbes colonize it patiently over several days. This makes raw rice a perfect choice for gardeners who want steady microbial stimulation without any sudden changes. Raw rice is especially helpful in soils that tend to dry out, quickly raised beds, sandy soils, or containers, because it absorbs water before it breaks down, creating a moist microenvironment where bacteria and fungi thrive. Researchers studying soil carbon inputs note that slow decomposing carbohydrates help build longer-lasting soil aggregates, improving structure over time rather than all at once. Next comes cooked rice, the rocket fuel of soil biology. Cooked rice is already hydrated and structurally soft, allowing microbes to colonize it immediately. This is why gardeners often notice white mycelium, those delicate fungal threads within just a few days of burying cooked rice. That fungal bloom is not a problem. It is a sign of a thriving decomposition process, the first stage of organic matter turning into plant-available nutrients. But because cooked rice is so biologically attractive, it must be used carefully. It should always be buried using the deep pocket method, mixed with a little soil to prevent clumping, and never left exposed on the surface. In controlled worm farms, cooked rice is often used in small amounts to accelerate composting because worms devour the microbes that grow on it. In garden soil, the same principle applies. Cooked rice can ignite a burst of microbial life, but only when properly concealed beneath the soil line. And then there is rice water, the most gentle, the most versatile, and perhaps the most scientifically studied of the three. Rice water contains dissolved starches, minerals like potassium and phosphorus, and B vitamins that directly support microbial metabolism. In laboratory analyses, the nutrient profile of rice water has been shown to include traces of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, zinc, and iron. These are not high enough to act as fertilizer on their own, but they feed the microbes that unlock deeper nutrients in the soil. When used fresh, rice water offers a mild boost, but when allowed to ferment for 24 to 48 hours, it becomes a probiotic powerhouse. Lactic acid bacteria multiply rapidly in this environment, producing compounds that suppress harmful pathogens while accelerating decomposition. This is why fermented rice water has been compared to commercial microbial inoculants, and why one 2023 agricultural study found that rice water paired with half the usual fertilizer rate outperformed full-strength fertilizer alone. So, which form should you use? Choose raw rice for slow and steady soil conditioning. Use cooked rice for fast microbial ignition in poor or compacted soil. And apply rice water when you want a gentle, repeatable liquid treatment that nourishes potted plants, vegetables, and flower beds without disturbing the soil at all. Each one works. Each one supports the same natural chain reaction. But choosing the right form means working with your garden's rhythm, not against it. And now, with a clear understanding of the tools, it's time we talk about something just as important as technique: the mistakes that stop gardeners from seeing results. Part 5. The mistakes most gardeners make and how to avoid them. Whenever a simple, powerful gardening method spreads quickly, misunderstandings follow right behind it. And the rice trick is no exception. Even seasoned gardeners often make one or two key mistakes that prevent them from seeing the transformation happening beneath the surface. The first mistake is using too much rice at once. In gardening, more is not better. More is just more. Soil biology thrives on balance. When gardeners dump cups of rice into a single spot, the soil becomes overwhelmed with carbohydrates. Instead of feeding beneficial microbes at a healthy pace, it can trigger anaerobic decomposition, a process that smells foul, repels worms, and suffocates tender roots. But when used in moderation, half a cup buried deep, or a cup of diluted rice water per plant rice, becomes a slow, steady builder of soil life. It follows the natural laws of decomposition rather than fighting them. The second mistake is applying rice on the soil surface. This is the easiest pitfall to fall into because scattering rice seems quick and harmless. But exposed rice does not belong to microbes. It belongs to pests. Rodents, raccoons, squirrels, and even ants can detect starch from remarkable distances. The result isn't improved soil. It's a free dinner invitation for the very critters we spend our time trying to discourage. By burying rice 6 to 8 inches deep and pressing the soil firmly after covering, you are sending the food where it truly belongs, underground, in the sheltered, moist arena where microbes and worms thrive. The third mistake is overwatering with rice water or using it too frequently. Even though rice water is mild, applying it every time you water creates a buildup of starch at the soil surface. This can encourage fungal mats, gnat infestations, or oxygen depletion in tightly packed soil. But when used sparingly, once every 3 to 4 weeks, or once a month, for houseplants, rice water becomes the perfect periodic boost, enhancing soil biology without disrupting the balance. The fourth mistake is subtle but important, expecting instant visible results. Rice doesn't behave like synthetic fertilizer. You won't wake up the next morning to giant leaves or explosive growth. Instead, rice supports the hidden processes that make long-term soil health possible. It builds the foundation, the unseen universe that allows plants to thrive naturally. Experienced gardeners, researchers, and soil biologists all agree on one point. The most profound changes happen slowly, quietly, at the microbial level. And it is precisely these changes, stronger aggregates, higher worm populations, richer microbial networks, that make your garden healthier, more resilient, and more self-sustaining over time. And finally, the fifth and most common mistake is giving up before the soil ecosystem stabilizes. The first time you bury rice, you might dig it up a week later and think nothing happened. But soil biology rarely works on the timetable we expect. Some soils respond quickly. Others need several applications before the microbial community reaches a tipping point. But once that tipping point is reached, the garden changes. Clay loosens, worms multiply, water absorption improves, plants begin to thrive without heavy intervention. The soil starts working for you instead of against you. Avoid these mistakes, and the rice method becomes not just a trick, but a transformation tool. It becomes part of a new mindset, a shift from forcing plants to grow toward nurturing the living soil that grows them. In the next section, we'll explore what happens inside the soil weeks and months after you begin using rice. The results may surprise you, and they reveal why this method resonates so deeply with gardeners who want to work with nature rather than against it. Part 6. What happens beneath the soil? Weeks after you start using rice. If you could shrink yourself down and walk through your soil a few weeks after using rice, you would witness a world very different from the one you started with. And it wouldn't look dramatic on the surface. Your garden might appear calm, unchanged, even quiet. But below the top few inches, biology is rewriting the landscape grain by grain. During the first week, rice acts as the ignition switch. Microbes surge. Fungi spread delicate networks of mycelium around every starch molecule. Earthworms begin to move gently toward the buried pockets, not in a rush, but in a slow, purposeful migration like travelers following the scent of a familiar feast. They know exactly where the microbial bloom is happening. By week 2 and 3, the rice itself becomes unrecognizable. It softens into a gel-like mass intertwined with fungal threads and bacteria-rich biofilms. Soil scientists studying decomposing carbohydrates describe this stage as microbial pulsing, a period when nutrient unlocking accelerates, soil respiration increases, and organic acids begin dissolving compacted mineral particles. And this is the moment gardeners rarely see but always feel later. Your soil starts to breathe. Air pockets open where none existed. Water infiltrates the soil instead of running off or pooling on top. Tiny aggregates, crumbs of living soil, held together by microbial glues, begin to form around the decaying rice. Researchers analyzing soil treated with fermented rice water found significantly improved aggregation and enzyme activity, two of the strongest predictors of long-term fertility. By week 4, something even more remarkable happens. The microbial community stabilizes. Instead of a short-lived bloom, you now have a thriving, self-balancing population of bacteria, fungi, arthropods, and worms working in synchrony. Worm tunnels spread horizontally and vertically like a network of quiet irrigation channels. Castings begin to appear around plant roots, evidence of nutrient-rich digestion happening non-stop. And right above this hidden universe, your plants begin to show subtle signs of the change. Their color deepens, their stems thicken, their leaves become upright, firm, vibrant. They aren't responding to fertilizer, they are responding to freedom. Their roots can finally move, they can finally breathe. They are no longer fighting the soil, they are growing into it. Weeks later, even months later, the impact of a single rice pocket still echoes through your garden, because once you awaken soil biology, it doesn't fade quickly. The microbes multiply, the worms reproduce, the improved structure persists, and every time you add another small handful of rice, you're not starting from zero. You're feeding a system already alive and hungry. This is why the rice method feels almost magical to gardeners who have struggled for years with clay, compaction, weak growth, or declining soil health. It is not magic, it is microbiology. But to see something so small create such deep, lasting change, well, it feels like magic anyway. Part 7. Why this method matters more today than ever before. As gardeners, especially seasoned gardeners, with decades of experience behind us, we often think we've seen every trick, every fertilizer, every method. But the world beneath our feet has changed. Modern soils are not the soils our parents and grandparents grew up with. They are more depleted, more compacted, more chemically stressed, and less biologically active. This is why the rice method is not just a curiosity. It is deeply relevant for the world we live in now. Several long-term studies conducted by soil scientists across the U.S. show dramatic declines in soil organic matter over the last century. Urban and suburban soils, where so many home gardeners grow their vegetables and flowers, are some of the most biologically impoverished in the country. Frequent construction, compaction, and overuse of salt-based fertilizers have left many soils functioning like lifeless substrates rather than ecosystems. And when soil biology collapses, everything collapses with it. Water doesn't infiltrate, nutrients don't cycle, worms disappear, roots struggle, plants weaken. Gardeners respond by adding more fertilizer, more amendments, more work. But the foundation is broken, and no amount of topping up can replace what microbes and worms once provided for free. This is where rice becomes far more than a gardening hack. It becomes a reminder of what the soil actually needs: carbon, moisture, and microbial fuel. Rice provides all three in a form the soil can immediately use. It doesn't bypass biology, it restores it. And here is something else worth noting. As we age, many of us begin searching for ways to garden more wisely, more gently, and with less physical strain. We still love the feel of the soil. We still love the rhythm of tending life. But our bodies ask us to work with nature, not against it. The rice method is perfect for this season of life. It replaces digging with feeding. It replaces force with encouragement. It replaces exhaustion with observation. Instead of wrestling with the earth, you collaborate with it, and the soil responds, patiently, quietly, reliably. For gardeners who grew up believing that hard work is the only path to good soil, this shift can feel almost philosophical. But the science is clear. Microbes rebuild soil better than muscles ever can. Worms till the earth more effectively than any spade or rototiller. Fungi unlock nutrients that no fertilizer can imitate. And rice, the most ordinary grain in the world, turns out to be the key that awakens them. In an age when soil is deteriorating, when gardeners are looking for sustainable, affordable, low-effort methods, and when many of us simply want to keep gardening without hurting ourselves, this simple, humble grain takes on tremendous meaning. It reminds us that the best solutions are often the simplest. And the most powerful force in gardening is not the strength of our hands, but the strength of the soil life we nurture. Part 8. Why rice outperforms traditional fertilizers in ways we never expected. For decades, many gardeners believed that fertilizer was the heart of plant health. If something wasn't growing, we added nitrogen. If something wasn't blooming, we added phosphorus. If leaves yellowed, we reached for potassium. Fertilizer taught us to treat symptoms, not systems. But growing research and the quiet wisdom of older gardeners who have watched nature for a lifetime reveals something deeper. Fertilizers feed plants. Rice feeds the soil. And these are not the same thing. When researchers compared plots treated with chemical NPK fertilizer to plots treated with fermented rice wash water, the results surprised even the scientists. The rice-treated soil had higher bacterial activity, better aggregation, and more earthworms. Plants didn't just grow, they grew in soil that was becoming richer and more alive with every passing week. Chemical fertilizers, on the other hand, gave plants a quick boost, but did nothing to rebuild the soil. In fact, repeated studies have shown that salt-based fertilizers can compact soil, reduce microbial diversity, and cause nutrients to leach away faster. Plants become dependent on a nutrient drip feed rather than forming strong biological relationships underground. Rice flips that model upside down. Adding rice doesn't drown the soil in nutrients. Instead, it strengthens the entire nutrient cycle. It increases microbial enzymes that break down existing organic matter, mobilizes minerals locked in clay, and encourages the formation of humus, the dark stable carbon that gives fertile soil its resilience. In essence, rice doesn't replace fertilizer. Rice makes fertilizer less necessary. This is why gardeners who begin using rice pockets or fermented rice water often report a quiet but unmistakable shift after a season or two. They find themselves fertilizing less. Their soil stays moist longer. Their plants resist stress better, whether from heat, drought, or sudden cold. It's not that rice is powerful, it's that biology is powerful. Rice simply hands the soil the ignition key. And in a world where fertilizer costs continue to rise, where supply chains falter, and where more gardeners want natural, low-cost solutions, this method becomes not just appealing, but deeply relevant. But to truly appreciate the transformation rice brings, let's step even deeper into the soil, into the realm of fungi, enzymes, and the hidden architecture built grain by grain beneath our feet. Part 9. The Underground Architecture. How Rice Helps Soil Build Itself. Every gardener knows what good soil feels like. You lift a handful, and it crumbles softly between your fingers. It holds moisture without becoming mud. It's dark, rich, and full of life. But what fewer gardeners know is that this texture, the very structure of healthy soil, is built almost entirely by biology. And rice is a master architect's assistant. When microorganisms digest rice starch, they release sticky compounds called extracellular polysaccharides. These natural glues bind sand, silt, clay, and organic matter into tiny clumps known as aggregates. Aggregates form the skeleton of soil. They determine airflow, water retention, drainage, and root penetration. In degraded soil, compacted lawns, construction-disturbed beds, over-tilled farmland, these aggregates are weak or non-existent. Water runs off. Clay hardens, roots hit walls they cannot push through. But rice changes those physical properties from the inside out. Studies analyzing soils treated with fermented rice water found significant increases in soil enzyme activity, an indicator that microbes were converting organic matter into stable forms. These enzymes help create humic substances, the long-lasting carbon compounds that give soil its iconic black color. Humus is what makes soil behave like a sponge, holding water during drought and releasing it gradually as roots need it. Rice fuels the creation of this humus, and while microbes are doing the microscopic work, worms are doing the architectural work. As worms follow the microbial bloom toward decomposing rice, they create horizontal and vertical tunnels. Each tunnel is lined with castings, which stabilize the walls and enrich the surrounding soil. In soil science, these tunnels are called macropores, and they are priceless. They allow oxygen to reach deep roots, let nutrient-rich water infiltrate quickly, and soften the soil in ways no tilling ever could. This is the underground architecture, the invisible cathedral that rice helps build, layer by layer, season by season. Most gardeners never see it, but they experience it. They see plants that need less water. They see soil that no longer cracks in summer. They see roots that grow deeper and stronger. They see garden beds that go from struggling to thriving. And all of it begins with something as humble as rice. As one soil scientist put it, healthy soil is not a product, it is a process. Rice simply accelerates that process, handing the soil the energy it needs to rebuild itself from within. But this journey is not finished yet, because what happens when gardeners stop using heavy inputs and start working with microbial life is more than a technique, it is a mindset. A shift in how we relate to the land, to our gardens, and even to our own aging bodies. And that mindset is the beating heart of the next chapter. Part 10. The Renewing Cycle. How Rice Creates Long-Term Soil Resilience. As we continue following the journey of a single handful of rice beneath the soil, something remarkable becomes clear. The improvements rice creates do not fade quickly. They compound, they strengthen over time, and eventually they form a soil system that becomes more resilient year after year, even with very little input from us. This long-term resilience is one of the most compelling discoveries in recent soil research. In the 2023 agricultural field study on fermented rice water, researchers found that even after 3 growing cycles, soils treated with rice-based amendments continued to show enhanced microbial life and increased nutrient availability, outperforming soils treated with fertilizer alone. The rice did not just boost a season's growth, it changed the soil's internal chemistry and biology in ways that persisted. Here's how that happens. When rice feeds microbes, those microbes produce organic acids, enzymes, and humic compounds that bind and stabilize soil particles. These stabilized aggregates become the backbone of fertile soil. Because they hold their structure through rain, heat, and drought, they create an environment where microbial communities can survive fluctuations in conditions. Think of these aggregates as tiny, breathable shelters, each one housing a thriving biological community. As seasons pass, leftover root material, fallen leaves, mulched stems, and compost add to this framework. Microbes break them down more easily because the soil is already rich in active biology fueled initially by rice inputs. Worms continue tunneling and casting, creating microhabitats that protect delicate microbial colonies. And then comes the feedback loop. More microbes create better soil structure. Better soil structure supports more root growth. More root growth deposits more carbon into the soil, and that carbon feeds more microbes. Rice ignites the first cycle, but biology, once awakened, carries the system forward. This is why gardeners who use rice pockets or rice water consistently often notice something subtle but powerful. Their gardens stop feeling fragile. They stop worrying about sudden heat waves or heavy rains. Plants bounce back faster. Soil doesn't slump or erode the way it used to. Water retention becomes noticeably better. This resilience is not accidental. It comes from turning the soil into a living, breathing, carbon-rich ecosystem, not a lifeless medium waiting to be fed. The soil becomes self-sustaining, working for you even when you're not working in it. And for gardeners seeking long-term fertility without heavy labor, this is the future of soil stewardship. But soil resilience is only half the story. The other half is what happens above ground, where plants begin to respond to this underground revival in ways that mirror the process of healing and renewal. Let's turn our attention now to what gardeners see happening in their plants once the biological engine begins running. Part 11. What your plants reveal. The visible signs of a living, rice-fueled soil. As the biology beneath your garden awakens, your plants begin telling the story from above. And if you pay attention, the changes are unmistakable. Sometimes subtle at first, like a small shift in color or strength, and sometimes dramatic, like a flush of new growth after years of stagnation. One of the earliest signs is leaf vitality. Plants growing in microbially rich soil tend to produce leaves that are deeper in color, firmer to the touch, and more resilient to heat and wind. This is because microbial byproducts, humic acids, amino acids, and plant growth hormones encourage stronger root development and more efficient nutrient uptake. In studies analyzing plant growth under rice water treatments, crops displayed increased chlorophyll content and improved nutrient absorption due to enhanced microbial activity around their roots. What this means for you is simple. Greener leaves, stronger stems, healthier plants. Another visible change comes in the root zone. Gardeners who gently lift and examine their plants after a few months of rice-based treatments often notice something extraordinary. The roots are longer, whiter, and more fibrous. They penetrate deeper into the soil profile because worms and microbes have softened pathways for them. Instead of hitting compacted barriers, roots now explore freely, absorbing moisture that was previously inaccessible. This leads to a third and crucial benefit: drought tolerance. Soils enriched with rice-driven microbial life hold significantly more moisture, and plants develop deeper root systems that tap into it. During hot spells or dry weeks, these plants remain upright and vibrant longer than those grown in compacted or biologically depleted soils. This is not fertilizer at work. It is soil architecture responding to biology. Then there is fruiting and flowering. While rice is not a high-nutrient fertilizer, it enhances nutrient cycling, meaning plants become better at using the natural nutrients already present in the soil. Gardeners using fermented rice water on crops like tomatoes and peppers report richer fruit color, improved firmness, and higher yields. Flowers bloom with greater intensity and stay vibrant longer, supported by steady root-to-soil communication. But perhaps the most overlooked benefit is disease resistance. Fermented rice water encourages populations of lactic acid bacteria microbes known for suppressing fungal pathogens and promoting plant immunity. In regenerated soils, plants are less prone to root rot, mildew, and other soil-borne diseases. Instead of relying on chemical sprays, gardeners find that healthier soil quietly protects their plants from below. These above-ground improvements reflect something deeper than plant nutrition. They reflect partnership. When soil biology is nurtured instead of ignored, plants respond with strength, resilience, and beauty. They become co-creators in the garden's well-being, thriving not because we force them to, but because we finally give the soil what it needs to do its job. And this brings us to a fundamental shift happening in modern gardening, a move away from exhaustion and toward ecological intelligence, a move toward understanding that when we feed the soil feeds everything else. In the next part, we will explore how this method fits into a broader philosophy of regenerative gardening, a philosophy that empowers gardeners of all ages, especially those seeking gentler, smarter ways to grow. Part 12, A Gentler Way of Gardening. Why this method is perfect for seniors. There comes a moment in every gardener's life when the joy of gardening remains strong, but the physical effort begins to ask more of us than it once did. Knees feel the hours, backs feel the bending, shoulders remember every shovel of soil we have turned, yet the desire to nurture life never fades. This is why the rice method resonates so deeply, especially with older gardeners who have spent years tending the land. It offers something rare in gardening: results without strain, transformation without force. You don't have to double dig to loosen the soil. You don't have to haul heavy compost bags every season. You don't have to work harder in order for your plants to grow stronger. With rice, you work smarter. With biology, you work with the soil, not against it. This method allows gardeners of every age, especially seniors, to continue enjoying the rhythms and rewards of gardening while reducing physical stress. Instead of digging, you tuck small pockets of rice into the soil. Instead of mixing fertilizers, you pour a diluted cup of rice water around your plants. Gentle actions, big returns. In many ways, it mirrors the wisdom that comes with age. When we are young, we rely on strength. As we grow older, we rely on understanding. The rice method reflects this shift beautifully. It teaches us that the soil doesn't need to be forced into cooperation, it only needs to be fed. And that realization, simple as it is, allows gardeners to extend their gardening years gracefully, joyfully, and sustainably. But this gentle approach isn't only a gift to the gardener, it's also a gift to the earth itself. And that brings us to something much larger than a single garden bed. A movement reshaping how we care for the land. Part 13. A regenerative mindset, working with nature instead of controlling it. If there is a theme running through the most exciting advances in soil science today, it is this: regeneration. The idea that instead of replacing nutrients with fertilizers, we restore natural processes. Instead of tilling, we protect soil structure. Instead of fighting biology, we enhance it. Using rice to activate soil life is one of many practices emerging in this new philosophy. Regenerative gardening says, let the soil rebuild itself. Let microbes cycle nutrients instead of chemicals. Let worms aerate the ground instead of shovels. Let fungi connect roots and share resources. And when we do this, something extraordinary begins to happen. We stop gardening through exhaustion and begin gardening through partnership. Rice becomes more than a soil amendment. It becomes an invitation to trust in the quiet intelligence of the natural world. This philosophy echoes what indigenous farmers, traditional gardeners, and ancient agricultural societies knew long before modern fertilizers existed. Healthy soil is alive. It is a community. It is an ecosystem. And when you feed that ecosystem properly, plants flourish not because you push them, but because you support the processes that sustain them. This is why rice and other gentle carbon-based inputs fit so seamlessly into regenerative systems. They nurture the foundation, they restore the cycles that harsh chemicals disrupt, and they help gardeners cultivate resilience both in the soil and in themselves. When you begin viewing your garden not as a project to control, but as a living network to nourish, everything changes. You worry less, you observe more, you see patterns, relationships, and rhythms that were invisible before. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the garden begins to teach you again, just as it did when you first fell in love with it. But to complete this transformation, there's one final piece: understanding how all of these insights come together into a practical, easy-to-follow rhythm you can use for the rest of your gardening life. Part 14. A simple rhythm to follow. How to make rice a natural part of your soil. Care, routine. Now that you understand the science, the methods, and the philosophy, here is the truth that matters most. You don't need a complicated schedule or a perfect plan to use rice effectively. You simply need a rhythm. A small handful of raw or cooked rice buried once every 1 or 2 months, a diluted cup of fermented rice water poured at the base of your plants once a month, a little observation after each season to see how your soil responds. That is enough. Because biology doesn't operate on strict calendars. It operates on continuity. If you use rice regularly, gently, consistently, your soil will continue building crumb structure, increasing microbial diversity, and attracting earthworms naturally. You won't need to start over each spring. You won't need to fight clay or sand year after year. Each season will begin on a stronger foundation than the one before it. Gardeners who follow this rhythm often describe a kind of quiet miracle unfolding in their garden. Soil that once felt dead becomes soft and dark. Beds that once needed constant watering hold moisture effortlessly. Plants that once struggled suddenly thrive with very little intervention. This is the power of biological gardening. This is the gift of working with nature's timing. And as the seasons pass, you begin to realize something profound. You are no longer trying to grow plants. You are growing soil, and the soil is growing everything else. If you step back and look at your garden as a whole, its soil, its roots, its worms, its microbes, its quiet cycles of growth, you begin to understand why rice is so transformative. Not because it feeds the plants, but because it feeds the life that feeds the plants. A handful of rice buried in the ground, a jar of fermented rice water poured gently into the soil. These are small acts, almost invisible, and yet they awaken forces far larger than themselves. They awaken the microbes that build structure. They awaken the worms that tunnel and breathe life into the ground. They awaken the enzymes that unlock nutrients buried for years. They awaken the soil's own ability to heal, restore, and renew. And as this living system comes back to life, so does something inside the gardener. Especially for older gardeners, for those who have spent a lifetime working the earth, this method offers a return to ease, to joy, to partnership with nature. It reminds us that gardening is not a contest of strength, but a conversation with life, a dialogue between the seen and the unseen. So the next time you rinse rice in your kitchen, pause, look at that cloudy water, that humble grain, and remember, inside that bowl is the spark of a living soil, a way to garden that nurtures not just the plants, but the earth itself. A way to continue gardening for years to come, gently, wisely, beautifully. This is the rice trick, not a shortcut, but a return to the kind of gardening that honors the soil, the seasons, and the quiet intelligence of nature. And your garden alive from the microbes up will thank you in every leaf, every blossom, every harvest.